So, I'd like to start this conference off by talking about the unwanted babies. You know, we never truly know what's best for us. It's so rare whether we want to admit it or not. We think we know, but in reality, we typically never do. You see, my last pregnancy with my fifth baby, others would see some smiles, whether in person or on social media. However, most of them were probably faked or forced. The majority of my pregnancy was spent in fear, in anguish, and pain, as I was also going through a very traumatic divorce. And I will talk later that I ended up remarrying my husband in obedience to God. But it was an emotional pain that was so deep that it caused me a different type of physical pain that I'd never want to have to experience again. My older 4 children watched me endure it, and this is painful to admit, but there was a small handful of moments I had laid curled up on the floor in the fetal position, asking God to naturally take the baby from me. I couldn't see beyond the pain and the heartache. Never once did I think of terminating the pregnancy, but I questioned God to naturally correct the mistake that wasn't supposed to be. That's how low I was. But how incredibly wrong I was. How foolish, how scared, how selfish, and just painfully wrong. God had to allow me to walk through some deep, hellish trenches alone, for a reason. But a mighty purpose was unfolding before me every single day. You see, that baby, who's now 3, was one of the best, most grand gifts I've ever been given. And my family of 7 still looks at him in awe every day at how blessed we are for him. So today, I'm more thankful for the prayers God did not fulfill for me than the ones he did. And also to the prayers that he answered in a 180-degree response to the selfish ones that I had asked him for. So I tell you all, if you're walking through hell right now, allow God to use it for his glory. You just may come out on the other side carrying buckets to put out others' flames one day. So our first speaker today has not only become my best friend and business partner, but she is a former Planned Parenthood clinic director and the author of national bestseller Unplanned, now a movie, which exposes the evils of Planned Parenthood. She is the world's leading pro-life advocate, sharing her life-changing experiences for women, men, and unborn babies worldwide. But as much as she's known for advocating for the unborn, what most of you don't know is what she does behind the scenes. Not just with her nonprofits of helping those leave the abortion industry, but rather helping families after the baby comes. What you don't hear is that she and her husband, Doug, have taken over a dozen women into their own home with their 8 children to help them when they had nobody else there. What you don't hear is how she helps families with their rent, their bills, their groceries, their vehicles. She truly shows up and shows out when there's literally no other way. What you don't hear or get to see, that despite being a lioness and one of the most physically and mentally strongest women I've ever met in my entire life, she has one of the most empathetic, tender, selfless, and compassionate hearts. She cares, she listens intently, and honestly, she doesn't want the recognition for it. She's the type to do something life-changing for someone but doesn't want to talk about it or give it any attention because she does it to do it. She has fully surrendered herself as a servant to God and to only be used as his humble vessel. I'm so proud to stand here and introduce you to the woman who has forever transformed my life by simply being a part of it. So without further ado, help me welcome the one and only Abby Johnson.
All right, that was too kind. Thank you all. It's so good to be here. And I appreciate all of you waking up and coming here early in the morning. I live in Texas with my husband, Doug, and our 8 kiddos. And I know it's a lot. Yeah. Let's see, we live in Austin, Texas, which is, Austin's like the Portland of Texas. So, it's, people are like, ugh, how do you live in Austin? And I say, well, it's our mission field in Texas. So, it's okay. But, yeah, so I live there, and let's see, we've got our oldest is a girl, Grace, and she's 15, and then we have 4 boys in a row. They are 10, 9, 8, 7. I know, I was there. And then we told God we would have one more, and we had twin girls. And you'll appreciate this because we went to Rome for Mother Teresa's canonization, and we said, this is too much information, but we used NFP, so we were like, oh, perfect. This is the week to use while we're in Rome to conceive a baby. So we were like, great, we're gonna go to Rome and conceive a baby on Mother Teresa's canonization. That's perfect, right? And so we go over there, and and we were so confident that we had done the job that when we were in Assisi, we bought a baptismal gown because we just knew we had knocked it out of the park. And so we bought a baptismal gown in Assisi, and we came home, and then we did indeed do what we went there to do. And then we found out we were pregnant, and then we found out we were having twins, and I thought, oh no, who gets the nice one from Assisi and who gets the one off of Amazon, right? And so I thought, well, I guess we're just going to have to give the one from Assisi away and just get 2 off of Amazon, right? Because that's not fair. And so Doug had put this on his Facebook just sort of as a joke, just said, oh, here's a funny story. And some girl messaged him, her name is Angie, messaged him and said, I'm in Assisi right now. And if you send me where the location of the shop, if you remember where it was, and you send me a picture of the gown, I'll go get you a matching one. And so he said, oh my gosh, okay. So he did, and she got one for us and mailed it to us. And so we had 2 matching baptismal gowns. Isn't that cool? So, and we always heard that I don't know if this is true, but we always heard that if you conceive a baby in Rome, that there are some hotels that will give you a free trip. So we were like, well, do we get 2? So we went to Rome saying, okay, like, please, Mother Teresa, please, just we just really want to conceive. And then we were like, okay, that was too much. But anyway, no. So we have these twin girls. They're beautiful. They're 5, and then one more, and we have our youngest. He's 3, Fulton, and then that's it, I say. But I'm done telling God never, because I've done that too many times. And like I said, I'm never going to drive a minivan. And now we drive a 12-passenger van. So, things like that. But yeah, our 7-year-old he was gifted to us through adoption. So we have an open adoption. So we have a very special place in our heart for adoption, the adoption community, and adopted kiddos. So yeah, I think most of you probably know my story. I think maybe there's some of you that are looking at me going, I have no idea who this lady is or why she's standing up there. I think most of you probably know my story. I think that most of you probably know that I worked at Planned Parenthood for 8 years of my life. I was an abortion clinic director there. I didn't start out that way. I didn't start out as a kid in a pro-choice home, in a pro-abortion home. I grew up in a really amazing home. I tell people I won the parent lottery when it comes to parents. I have amazing parents. I have an amazing family. I'm an only child, and so my parents' world revolved around me. I'm not sure that's the best thing, but I did. And so, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church. I remember that moment when I accepted the Lord into my heart. I remember that moment. I remember my parents didn't even know I was doing it. I remember it was the first of many times I would shock my parents. I remember, walking out of the aisle and walking out of the pew and walking down that center aisle and making my public profession of faith. I was baptized Easter of 1988 with my dad. And I remember the topic of abortion coming up maybe once or twice as I was growing up. I remember my parents saying we were against abortion, but it was not something that we sat around the dinner table and discussed. It was not something that was ever talked about in my church. It was never talked about in our youth group. I never heard my pastor talk about it. And, it was a different time. So in the late 70s, early 80s, abortion was not discussed in the media like it is today. Women were not standing up at podiums and shouting their abortion. Women were not wearing T-shirts that said, I've had an abortion. Women were not proud of the fact that they had taken the lives of their children. So it was truly a different time. People still had a filter, right? So not everything that came into the head came right out of the mouth. I would have been in trouble. Even people who they voted for, it was still very private back then. I remember my parents used to let me, when I was a kid, go into the voting booth with them. And it was, I grew up in Louisiana, and it was, one of those voting booths. Some of you may remember it, but it had a curtain that went around you, and it had little tabs in it that you could flip down for whoever, you wanted to vote for. And then you would sort of like pull this thing, and it would, collect your votes, and the tabs would flip up, and the curtain would go ding, and it would open, right? Y'all remember that? Okay. So my parents would go in separately so that I would be able to flip the tabs down for them. That was my favorite part. And so, but my parents would say, every time we would go in to vote, my parents would say, Abby, we're going to let you go in here and do this, but you cannot tell any of your friends who we voted for. As if anybody would have thought that my parents would have voted for anyone other than the Republican candidate, okay? Like, my parents, like, die-hard Republicans. Anyway, but things were private. Anything involving sexuality was considered very taboo at the time, and that included abortion. And so I think my parents just thought, you know, we've taught our daughter the biblical pathway to marriage, you know, abstinence, and so as long as she follows that path, which we are sure she will, then abortion will never be on the table. And so this is just something that we really just don't need to talk about. We don't need to talk about something so unpleasant with our little girl. And so we didn't talk about it. And we never did. We didn't really talk about sexuality at all. I remember in 3rd grade, my mom called me into her room, and she had a book about sex. And she said, I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you about something very important. And she opened this book, and I was so embarrassed. I started crying and said, I cannot believe you and Dad do this. And I ran out of the room, and that was it. We never talked about it again. That was it. I went to college, and I got into a relationship with a guy that was 8 years older than me. He lived in my apartment complex. And that relationship moved very quickly physically. And I remember taking my first pregnancy test, and it was positive. And so I took like 10 more, hoping that that one was wrong. And what do you know? They were all positive. And so I went to my boyfriend, my older boyfriend, who, you know, I thought, oh, well, he's older. He's going to have some wisdom here for me. He's going to know what to do. And I went to him and said, I'm pregnant. What do we do? And he said, oh, I know what to do. I know where to take you. I've taken other girls there before. And I would really, really like to tell you that I looked at him and said, well, wait a minute. We've been doing some adult things over here, so let's sit down and have an adult conversation right now about where we go from here. Or that we sat down and talked about adoption or being parents, or that we called our local pregnancy center. But I didn't even know what a pregnancy center was. I'd never heard of one. More than anything, I would like to tell you that I picked up the phone and I called my parents. My parents who had always been there for me. My parents who had always loved me unconditionally, no matter what ridiculous, stupid things I had gotten into. My parents, the people who definitely would have wanted to know what I was thinking about the life of their grandchild, who deserved to know what I was thinking in regards to the life of their grandchild. But I didn't. I just looked at my boyfriend and I said, okay, let's make the appointment. And we drove the hour and a half to the abortion clinic in Houston. And he dropped me off on the curb. I walked in alone. And I don't remember a lot from that day. It's sort of, I don't know. I just don't remember a lot. But I remember being in a group counseling room, not really counseling, but I use that term loosely, but I remember being in this area with a lot of women, and there was a staff member in there, and she showed us a video. I don't remember what was on the video, but I guess afterward we all looked a little frightened. She started laughing at us, and she said, "Oh, girls, you'll be fine. I've had 9 abortions." And you know, that did make me feel better. Because I thought, oh, well, if she's done this 9 times, and I'm only doing this once, and she's okay after 9, then I'm going to be okay after 1. And then I just remember being in the actual procedure room. I remember being on the table. I remember the procedure was excruciatingly painful. And then I remember waking up in the recovery room. And the staff member came over and got me dressed right in the middle of the room. And she gave me 2 saltine crackers and a little plastic cup of tap water, and she told me I could leave. And my boyfriend wasn't there yet to pick me up, and so I asked a woman there, I asked the staff member there if I could wait in the lobby for my boyfriend to get there, and she said no, I had to wait outside on the curb. And so I did. And my boyfriend came to pick me up, and we drove home in silence. And you know what? I did feel relieved. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel like I had just killed my baby. I wasn't thinking about my baby at all, actually. I was thinking that this was the biggest crisis I'd ever encountered at that time in my life. And man, I was glad that that crisis was over. I was thinking, man, I'm so glad I don't have to tell my parents that I was pregnant. And I was thinking, you know, it's not that I'm for abortion. It's not that I think abortion is okay. You know, I can still consider myself pro-life. I mean, I can still be pro-life. When people ask, I mean, I can still say I'm pro-life. It's not that I like abortion. It's not that I think abortion's okay. It's just that this time it was me. At the clinic, we had this green comment card that we would have women fill out after their abortions, after they were done and they were in the recovery room. In the bottom left-hand corner, there was a little section that said, "How did you hear about us?" And I can't tell you how many cards we got back. And in that little section, it would say, "I used to pray out in front of this facility, but this time it was me." Or it would say, "I used to volunteer at my pregnancy center, but this time it was me." And that's exactly how I felt. I thought, see, they don't understand. These people, I can still be pro-life, but they don't get it. They don't understand. Because this time it was me. And I was trying to be good. I was on birth control. I was a good Christian kid on birth control. And when you're a good Christian kid on birth control, you're not supposed to get caught in your sin. But I had been caught. So I had to fix it. And my dad, he was a deacon in the church. And my mom was a church pianist. And I just didn't want to embarrass them. I didn't want to cause them any shame. How embarrassed would they be if their daughter, who, I was one of the top in my class. And I went to college on all these scholarships. And I knew better. I was in the youth group. I was class president. I did all of these things. Like, they had all these high hopes for me. And how embarrassing would it be if their daughter, the daughter of a deacon, comes home and she's pregnant and she's unmarried? And so, you know what? I just did everybody a favor. I just took care of it. I did everybody a favor. And now there's no shame. There's no embarrassment. And nobody has to deal with it. I realize now just how little credit I gave my parents. And now, my parents, to this day, mourn the loss of their grandchild. A year later, I was on my college campus, and I saw this booth, and it was dripping in hot pink, and that's my favorite color. And they were giving away a bunch of really cool stuff, and so I walked over to it, and it was a Planned Parenthood booth, and I didn't have my first abortion at a Planned Parenthood. So I didn't know what it was. I don't think I'd ever heard the name Planned Parenthood up until that moment. And she started talking to me about all these amazing things that Planned Parenthood does, right? It was like this benefactor to the masses. And I thought, well, great. Who doesn't want to help women? And when she started talking about abortion, she started talking about how their goal was to make abortion safe, legal, and rare. And that made sense to me. That seemed reasonable. And 21 years ago, when I got involved in Planned Parenthood, that was the talking point: safe, legal, and rare. And that's what everybody said. That's even what the president said. Right? I mean, that's what Bill Clinton said. And he wouldn't lie. So it had to be true, right? And honestly, the safe, legal, and rare mantra, it made sense to a lot of people. It made sense to apathetic Republicans. It made sense to moderate Republicans. It made sense to independents. It made sense to the bulk of Democrats. It made sense to people who really didn't think much about the pro-life movement, who didn't think much about abortion, but considered themselves Republican. Because nobody wants abortion to be safe, legal, and plentiful, right? Not back then. That wasn't the thought process, right? Safe, legal, and rare made sense. And it made sense to me as like this young, ignorant, naive, idealistic college kid. And remember, I just had an abortion a year before. So as she's saying this to me, I think, well, that makes sense. And who am I to tell a woman not to have an abortion? I just had one. So, I mean, and really they're trying to reduce abortion, and it's only in those situations where women really need it, right? That's what she's telling me. That's what this Planned Parenthood salesperson, essentially, is telling me. So it has to be true. And I mean, where would I be if I hadn't had access to a safe and legal abortion? I mean, would I have had to go to one of those back alley clinics? So I signed up. What harm could it be just to go check it out, see what it's like? I signed up. That sign up led me to a lifestyle inside of Planned Parenthood. I started volunteering for a little bit. Thought I was helping women, thought I was doing the right thing. Then I graduated and they offered me a job. And then I thought, well, wow, now I can really help women. I'm going to work here every day. I'm going to really help them, provide health care. I'm going to help these poor women who have nowhere else to go but us. Plus, the money was really good. And then I had another unplanned pregnancy. And this time, choosing abortion was easy because I was already there and I'd already started selling abortion to other women. I was deep in that sin. And so I did. I had my second abortion. A pill abortion this time. It was horrific. But that didn't stop me from working there. Even though these same people had lied to me, that didn't stop me. Then I started working in public policy for Planned Parenthood. I started working in political affairs, working in the politics. They trained me to do fundraising. I raised millions of dollars for Planned Parenthood. They trained me in their education department. I started going into schools, teaching Planned Parenthood's sex education program. Their graphic sex education program begins in kindergarten. I started perverting the minds of innocent children, beginning in kindergarten. Their first grade program, you bring in stuffed animals so you can show them different sex positions. I broke down their natural modesty. I taught them words, phrases that no child should ever be exposed to. I essentially exposed them to pornography in elementary school. Thousands and thousands of children. I told them that their parents weren't safe, that they couldn't trust their parents when they had questions. And then I was so good at everything I did. I was so good at all of the evil that I perpetrated. They promoted me again. And I was the clinic director of the whole place. I ran the whole place. And then I was so good at selling abortions to vulnerable women, they gave me their Employee of the Year award. And I was so excited to get it. Their top salesperson of death. That was me. And I would love to stand up here and tell you that I had all of this angst about my job during that 8 years, but I didn't. Because when you're living in that sin, when you're exposing yourself to that kind of evil, the enemy can quite literally blind you to what you're a part of each and every day. I tell people I have witnessed evil in a way that I hope most of you never do. Very sensory. I have touched evil as I have touched the bodies of these babies, when I have assembled them and put them back together. I've seen it as I've looked upon these babies. I've smelled it. Abortion has a very, very unique smell, unlike anything you've ever smelled before. And when you have that sensory experience with evil, it does something to your soul. It hardens your heart. It sears your conscience. And only an encounter with God, only an encounter with the Holy Spirit can break that callous. And you all know that's exactly what happened to me. I had that encounter with God inside of an abortion clinic. God can show up anywhere. Don't ever doubt how mighty He is. Don't ever doubt how powerful He is. Don't ever doubt the places where He might show up. Don't ever think, oh, well, the abortion clinic, it's too evil. God will never show up there. You know what? He showed up there. He showed up there for me. Because I tried so hard to run for Him. I was running so fast, but you know what? God is always faster. He's always faster than you. And when you are one of His children, He will never stop fighting for you. And He fought for me. He fought for me inside the walls of that abortion clinic. And I'm so glad He did. I tell people all the time this story. When I was working in public affairs with Planned Parenthood, part of one of my jobs was going into pro-abortion, pro-life representative and senators' offices with my pro-abortion list of things that I was lobbying for. That's hard in Texas. It's a tough job. But I had this list, and there was one particular senator that was not fond of Planned Parenthood, and we all knew it. And most of the people who lobbied for Planned Parenthood, they just skipped right over his office because people were not friendly in his office. They didn't like us. But I was young and stupid and had a lot of hubris, and I said, you know what, I'm going. I'm going in his office, and I'm gonna show them what we're doing. So I did. So I stopped by the office. I turned the doorknob, and I opened the door, and I was met right at the door, like she was waiting, by this little woman who was wearing a Precious Feet pin. And I later came to find out that she was his chief of staff. And she was no bigger than a minute. She was just a little tiny thing. And she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm with Planned Parenthood, and I would like to give you our legislative priority list." And she said, "There's no need, we don't want it." And I said, "Well, I understand, but I would really like the senator to look it over and see what we're doing." And as I was trying to walk in the door, she literally body checked me out of the doorway, this little tiny lady. And she said, "We have no need for you here." And I was so taken aback by it. I was like, "Yes, ma'am." And I walked away. And I think about that encounter all the time. Because I think in our culture, we compromise too much. There were a lot of pro-life legislators. There were a lot of pro-life senators and representatives that, they took our stuff, even though it probably went in the trash. Why? Why? Why take our pamphlet? Why even allow us in the door? The Bible says that when we see evil, we are not to compromise with it. We are to what? Flee from it. That's what that lady did. She didn't even let my evil step through the threshold of that door. She physically kept me out. She said, "No, we don't want you here. Get out. You have nothing for us. Get out." She was not going to cooperate with me in any way, shape, or form. She interrupted my plan. That's what we ought to be in this culture. Interrupters. We are to be interrupters of evil. At every corner, at every turn, when we see evil, interrupt it. I think about sometimes my first abortion. Now listen, hear me when I say this. I was not a victim, okay? I was not a victim. I willingly walked into that abortion clinic. I willingly laid on that table. Nobody forced me. I was not coerced. I paid for it. I made the decision, okay? It was my responsibility. I walked in there alone. But I think about this sometimes. I walked into that building, that brown brick building, by myself. And I hate to go down the what if road because it doesn't serve us well, but sometimes I wonder, what if? What if someone would have been outside of that clinic that day? What if a faithful sidewalk advocate would have been out there that day? What if someone would have been there to interrupt my decision to walk in that day? What if someone would have looked at me and said, have you ever heard of a pregnancy resource center? I would love to take you there. Have you ever had an ultrasound? I didn't even know what an ultrasound was. I don't even know if I had one. What if somebody would have looked at me and said, have you talked to your parents? Because, yeah, your parents may be disappointed that you had sex outside of marriage, but I bet they would be more disappointed to find out that you killed their grandchild. Maybe that would have interrupted my plan that day. And if my plan would have been interrupted that day, my life would look very different today. If I would have never walked into that abortion clinic, if I would have never had that first abortion, I would have never worked at Planned Parenthood. And if I wouldn't have ever worked at Planned Parenthood, I wouldn't have had my second abortion. I wouldn't have perverted the minds of thousands of children. I wouldn't have gone on to help facilitate over 22,000 abortions during my 8 years there. I wouldn't have to live with that burden in my life for the rest of my life. What if someone could have interrupted me that day? Guys, that's what we are called to be in this culture. Disruptors, interrupters. Somebody may say, oh, that's bad behavior. Good. Cause a stir. Cause a disruption. Be loud. Be vocal. We're not being loud enough. We're not being vocal enough. We're not disrupting enough. We're not causing enough of a stir. Who cares if people don't like you? There are a lot of people that don't like me. Good. Because the people that don't like me are the people that I don't want to be in communion with. I have to believe that the people who don't like me are the people who are against the truth of God. And those are not the people that I want to be in unity with in the first place. I want them to look at me and go, I can't stand her. She makes me uncomfortable. I want to make them uncomfortable. Because if they are uncomfortable, that means that the Holy Spirit is doing something inside of them. It means that He's pricking their conscience. It means that something is going on in here. It means that the truth of God is sparking something inside, and that's what I want. I want to be always interrupting the plans of evil. That should always be our goal, all of us, everywhere. We have the fullness of truth. Why wouldn't we want to share that everywhere we go? No matter who it offends. Don't worry about offending people. Worry about offending the heart of God. Don't worry about performing for each other. Because at the end of your life, you're not going to stand in front of each other. At the end of your life, You're not going to stand in front of any of your Facebook friends. And God's not going to ask you how influential you were on social media. I don't know what God's going to ask us. He may want to know what we did for the least of these. He may want to know how we lived our life in service to him. He may want to know if we lived our lives on fire for him and the gospel and truth with a capital T. Woe to those who lived a life being lukewarm. He will spit us out. I have a feeling that most of you in here, you're here because you are on fire for truth. Because you want to be disruptors, because you want to be interrupters. Guys, continue that message, but do it with even more boldness. Because evil will always be out there. Abortion will always be out there. This isn't over. We had a good win this year, but it's not over. This isn't over. We're not done. We're far from done. It's far from over. We have to keep fighting. We can't just wait for victory to come. We know one day victory is going to come, but we can't just sit around and go, well, one day victory is going to come, so I'm just going to sit here and wait for it. We fight every day until Jesus returns. We fight every day until that victory comes. As long as evil is here, as long as evil persists, as long as there are people on this earth that continue to escalate evil, we will fight. And friends, one day, we will win. Thank you all so much, and God bless you.